Hello, and a big warm welcome to the Guardian Doula's Diary podcast. My name is Angela Deuce, or Angie. I'm your host and the founder of Guardian Doula. I'm a certified birth and postpartum doula and childbirth educator based on Sydney's Northern Beaches and serving women and their families all throughout Sydney. This podcast is an honest collection of the stories and experiences of birthing women and the professionals that support them to empower, equip, and inspire us all. Let's get into it. Kick us off and tell us about yourself and what you do and just all the things.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Elsie. I am a mental health nurse. I'm a mum to two little boys who are 4 and 1, and they were both born at home here in Melbourne, where I live. And I have my husband, Kun. And what else? I host the Birthing at Home, a podcast. And I've been doing that for about a year. I'm like I don't really know what to call myself, but like I'm the co-creator, co-founder, whatever, of Homebirth Victoria. And when I'm not doing all of that, I've also started doing doula work. So I have lots of hats.
Oh, that's so cool. I definitely see what you meant when you said before we hit record.
Yeah.
People always say that I'm busy. You sound very busy. That's so exciting
Yeah.
too that you started doing doula work. When did you start doing that?
So my story kind of begins like 10 years ago when I started studying nursing and midwifery on the Sunshine Coast. And I didn't realize at the time that it was the coordinator of the whole program was Rachel Reed. And people asked me like, oh, what was she like? But like at the time, like no one, I don't think consciously was like, oh my gosh, like it's Rachel Reed, it was just like that was who the coordinator was. But, inspired by all of the amazing tutors and lecturers that we had, I, fell in love with birth. I was, only 18. I'd done lots and lots of babysitting and babysitting for like babies before, but, being around birth, talking about birth, like that was all brand new to me. So I guess, it was like a clean slate to sort of, I was very impressionable, I guess. And long story short, but after 3 years, I did all my 100 antenatal appointments, 100 postnatal appointments. I had gotten all my births, done all my follow throughs. I burnt myself out, and I was trying to decide between midwifery and nursing, and eventually was like, I'm gonna have more career prospects as a nurse because even 7 years ago or whatever, when I ended the midwifery, you still had to get like 5,000 hours or whatever to become a private midwife, and you still had to go do the grad program through the hospital, and that was and still is pretty much the pathway. And I had no interest in that, so I grudgingly finished my 4th year just of nursing, and then in 2019, I became pregnant with my son Murphy, and I had a home birth. And I did have a student midwife, but it was the start of COVID, and she was from Tasmania. And she, because of like how strict it was here in Melbourne and like border closures and everything, she had to go back home to Tasmania. So I was meant to have that extra support person, but I didn't. It ended up just being the 2 midwives, which was fine. But there were some things that I believe could have been different, in the pointy end of the birth. With my now 4-year-old Murphy. And I suppose I didn't really reflect on that too much until, further down the line. And so then in 2022, I became pregnant with Frankie, who turned 1 in June. So he was born in June 2023. And I again had a student midwife on that journey with me. And she had 2 kids. One of them was a home birth. And that was the most amazing birth ever. Like, it was hard. Personally, I experienced it as painful. It took way longer than I wish it. I thought that it was going to be shorter, but it was actually longer. But I clearly remember that my main supports were my student Chantel, and my husband. And off the back of the birth of Frankie, I was just like, oh my gosh, like I love birth. I want to get back in that world. And I can't, over the years, I've toyed with the idea of like going back to midwifery and like, finishing it off, and like would it transfer between unis, like all of the work that I did, and never really committed to it. And to be honest, I knew of student midwives obviously because I had been a student midwife, and I suppose I knew of doulas in some sense, but it wasn't honestly until after Frankie was born in June 2023 that I started to kind of hear these things like birth attendant and birth keeper and doula. And I was like, maybe somebody will listen to this and be like, oh yeah, she messaged me, because I was like messaging people being like, what, you say you're a birth keeper, like what is that? Is that different to a doula and a birth attendant? Like, what is this? And through all of that, I came across a person, a woman in the birth community that I'd known about for like since 2020 14, sorry, when I started this whole journey, I guess, and that is Ria Dempsey. And then I found out that she did birth attendant training here in Melbourne. And I was like, oh, well, maybe that's something. And then, you know, I was emailing, I was like, so what is a birth attendant? And like, I just want to go to births and support women at births. That has been my journey. And so I started the training with an amazing bunch of women in February this year. And I've been to a couple of births at home here in Melbourne. And yeah, that was probably like too long of a like intro into how I got into doula work. But yeah, that's my journey so far.
That's amazing. That's so cool. I feel like for a lot of us, it's a similar thing where you have a baby and then you go, oh my goodness, birth is the coolest thing ever. And I just have to be around it and part of it and support women. And I can so relate to what you were saying about wanting to, like, you were like, oh, do I do midwifery? And you like did, like you got so far into that and that was where you were going. I also for a long time was like, oh, should I be a midwife? Should I be a midwife? And then I had a similar moment where I was like, do you know what? I think the medical side of things isn't really my passion. Like it's more just the relationship and the like going on that journey with someone and getting to know their family and being a support to them. Like that side of it was just so much, I don't know, it appealed to me more. I think I was just like more passionate about that side of things. Yeah, it's so cool. I'm really interested to hear about your, like how you kind of landed on birthing at home, having done all of your midwifery stuff. Like what made you do that? Did you kind of see hospital birth and go, oh my gosh, I just would rather be in my own space? Like what was it for you that kind of made you go that way?
I remember it being like mostly I knew that I always wanted a private midwife. Like that I don't, you know, I think honestly before starting midwifery, I had never thought about birth before. I just thought I was going to go learn how to catch babies, to be honest, like nothing about women or like, you know, I just wanted to catch babies. But like through my study, the one thing, if there was one thing that really truly stuck, or two things that really, really stuck out was that private midwifery care was the best. That was like the gold standard. And second of all, that the maternity system is effed. So naturally you land on being born at home or birthing at home. I mean, still there's things that like I would still do differently. Like, you know, I didn't really, because I studied in Queensland. And I suppose, you know, the first time round when you've never, I mean, same for doulas, like the first time round, if you've never searched for individuals, pretty much, I mean, if you type in private midwife in Melbourne, certain results pop up all the time. But that doesn't mean that like that's the only option or even the best option. That just means that like, I don't know, the search engine optimization is like, you know, fired for that particular result. And that, it doesn't mean anything. But like that's how I suppose I came across my midwives for, you know, the birth of Murphy. And then even second time round for Frankie, we were kind of like in a panic and I didn't want to go through the same midwifery business. So I went for a different one. But now I think this time, like if there was another time round, I would definitely choose like a, you know, I mean, all midwives obviously practice in pairs, but, you know, like a more independent, standalone private midwife. But yeah, same with being a doula. Somebody asked me the other day, is like, oh, you know, I have a friend who's pregnant. Like, how do you find a doula? And I was like, well, there's like 1,000 websites out there and some doulas are going to be listed in some places and some not. And like some have Instagrams and, you know, it's just, it's, there's a lot of options out there. And I think, the first time around it can be kind of overwhelming and you're just sort of guided by what, you stumble across, I guess.
Yeah, you do. And there's so much information out there, whether it's about doulas or whether it's finding a midwife or like breastfeeding, like all of it. There's so much information. It's so inundating.
Yeah. I can imagine if you don't like have a sort of guiding value, maybe, I don't know if value is the right word, but a guiding value, that when you first become pregnant, if you've not known what any of your options are, it would be so easy to just be guided by what the status quo is, you know, what the top option is, you know, the most searched option, the most recommended option. I mean, in maternity care, that doesn't mean that that's the best option for you. So I guess going back to, initially, like, how did I choose home birth? It was because I knew I wanted a private midwife, and that's how I chose home birth. Obviously, I knew about home births. Lots of my teachers at uni had home births or were home birth midwives. My husband was born at home in the Netherlands, so I knew about it. And I remember like when it was, you know, in those first initial appointments with my midwife, you know, where would you like to birth? And like, this is the hospital that you could birth at, or like, you know, I remember kind of being like, oh my gosh, like I can decide here right now that I can have a home birth. Like it just felt amazing to be able to have that choice and make that choice. And so thankful that I did.
Oh, that's so cool. It's so cool that you had the options explained to you
from early on. I mean, like, obviously, as you said, you had been around people, like, home birth wasn't a foreign concept.
Yeah.
I feel like for most women, they don't even know that it's an option. And even those who know that it's an option, there's such this, like, intense cultural misunderstanding of home birth, and it's viewed as this thing of like, oh, you know, that's just for weird hippies and like extremists, and it's this weird thing that weird people do. And there's so many myths around it. And I feel like it'd be really cool to chat about some of those and debunk them, because I mean, the research shows that home birth is actually safer for most women. And you know, if you compare like for like, so you can't even argue like, oh, well, you're comparing apples and oranges. Like, of course, home births are better because the high risk women give birth in hospital. Like, no, if you compare low risk women giving birth at home and in hospital, you see that the home birth women have better outcomes. Like, they really do. And yeah, it's sad that there's such a misconception around it, because it's really like actually quite counterintuitive that we would think that a normal bodily process like giving birth, you know, the same thing as vomiting or blinking or falling asleep, like those are things that our body just knows how to do, and they're just normal processes. Like, you're not sick when you're giving birth. So it's bizarre that we, as in the majority of the population, give birth in hospital. And it's like childbirth has been, I think, deemed to be this very dangerous event, and it's just not the case at all. So
I guess, like,
talk through like some of your favorite myths and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I suppose, like, I am constantly, because I hear, you know, birth stories all the time with my own podcast, like, I'm always reflecting on, like, what is the barrier to people just accepting that it is an option? Because I just, you know, the first thing that came to mind was this video that I saw this morning, and I didn't even watch it, but I saw it, you know, making its rounds on Instagram. And I think it was like a news piece from America. And it looks like, from the very brief snippet that I saw, it looks like that a woman is giving birth in a car, maybe, or maybe she's in a house, I don't know, and the baby's coming out and the cord is wrapped around the baby's neck.
Oh, classic.
Classic. And the policeman that was like present, like, moves the cord, and the story is more about the policeman moving the cord than anything. And I mean, it got viewed like hundreds of thousands of times. Like, there's hundreds and hundreds of comments. You know, the snippets like of that I saw were like, you know, like, thank God they were in a hospital, and thank God that they or maybe they were in a hospital. I guess they must have been in a hospital. But why would there be a policeman? I don't know. Like I said, I didn't even watch it.
It's baby brain. You've got kids. You're so forgiven. I'm like, wait, that doesn't make sense.
That doesn't make sense. Anyway, the thing was that people were saying like, oh my gosh, that's why you should give birth in hospital, because of things like that. And that is just not true. A cord around your baby's neck does not mean it's an emergency. I don't know how many times we have to say this. It's so infuriating, because say that video is viewed, I don't know, like, let's say like 100,000 times, or by 100,000 people or whatever, for so many, but you know, you and I are probably like consuming birth videos and birth stories like every day, all the time. But for most people, they're not. And so if their only understanding is that, holy crap, like, that baby was born with like its cord around its neck, and like, these babies are suicidal, like, they just, you know, we've got to be like really careful, because these babies are just, they could die. They're so fragile. You know, so I need to be in a hospital, because like, what if something goes wrong? Because, you know, you I guess you could through scans, like, know if the cord is wrapped around baby weirdly, but like, for the most part, you're going to know when the baby comes out. And so I think people, they do not trust birth, they don't trust babies, they don't trust women's bodies, they don't trust, you know, the power of you know, physiology of like things working. It just leaves me speechless, because I don't know how we can overcome that fear of women's bodies, babies, because babies are clever. Babies, like what the heck, you know, when you hear stories about like babies, you know, being in like not an optimal position, and then, you know, they move, and like, even like in the birth of Frankie, his head came out, and then that restitution where like he like moved to like line his shoulders up better, like, what the heck? That's like, how does the baby know? That's like, so it's freaky and so cool. But I think we've just like, as a, I mean, I can only really speak for like Australian society, but I really think that I know that like, we've lost that understanding of our bodies, of birth. You know, like we said before, you know, there would usually have been like women attending births, like in the village, like, you know, you would know about birth, like the kids would be at the, like, you know, around like newborn babies, and like the village was present. And nowadays the village is history. You know?
It's like non-existent. There's so much in what you just said. Like, I mean, what you commented on about this very widespread distrust in birth and this perception that it's this dangerous thing, I feel like it is pretty much all just rooted in misinformation. Like that example of the cord around the baby's neck, everyone goes, oh my goodness, so-and-so's cord was wrapped around their neck. Oh, thank goodness we were in a hospital, or they would have died. And it's like, mate, that's not even a thing. Like, you have no idea.
Do you even know how an umbilical cord works?
Like, exactly.
It's not a rope.
To the placenta, like they're getting the oxygen from that. It's a whole thing. And I feel like the more that people tell stories boldness and they're just unashamed. I feel like that is, and there's probably so many other things too that would play into it and that need to happen. But I reckon storytelling is always such a big part of things shifting culturally and in society, and you know, and I just think like the more women, which is literally what you're doing, like you've got this whole podcast is doing that, where it's just a platform for women to share, like, hey, I had a really beautiful experience at home. I mean, even just what you were saying before about people don't trust that birth works, you know, and babies have these insanely strong instincts, you know, that they use to navigate the process of childbirth, and then you see it afterwards. Like, you know, how do you think the baby just knows to start looking for the nipple so that they can see? Like, it's instinct, and those instincts don't just magically start when they're outside of the uterus. Like,
it's not like it's an on-off button, you know, like it's I mean, babies are incredible, and sure, you know, when you see a baby giraffe like be born, like the baby giraffe is like standing up like within, I don't know, minutes or whatever, and sure, you know, it takes a really long time for human babies to like get moving and stuff. They're not stupid. We have big brains. Like, it's just babies are so clever, you know. Even like when a fresh baby is born and it's away from like its mother and it's crying, like it can tell, it knows that like the mom or like even the partner or whatever, like, you know, the people that have been, you know, talking to it during that pregnancy and whatever, like it knows. But I think well, I mean, sex education in Western society is just also, well, I don't know if it ever existed, but it certainly doesn't really exist now. Like I don't know what they're teaching at school now, but I certainly didn't get like a proper sex education. And I think, you know, so much of the basics that you do get taught at school, for example, because, you know, I suspect most of our parents and grandparents, I don't know how far it extends, generation, you know, and I mean, you can see it reflected so much through society, but like the talks weren't happening at home. So it falls on the school, you know, the school is the educational institution. And so much of that was just basically how not to get pregnant. Like it doesn't teach you anything about positive sex education. It doesn't really teach you about, you know, healthy relationships and, you know, the depths of that. And then onwards from that, like about pregnancy, because, you know, when you're 17 years old, like that's what they're saying, don't get pregnant at 17. They're not saying, okay, well, in a couple of years, maybe it's like more socially acceptable for you to be pregnant and these might be your options, you know. I know that Amanda and Eleanor, the directors of Born at Home, they're trying, or one of their goals is to get into schools and show Born at Home in schools. And I think that would be, amazing. Because if you're only consuming what the algorithm is showing you, like it's kind of luck of the draw if you're seeing positive stuff or if you're seeing negative stuff. And if you're 20 years old and you don't know anything about pregnancy or birth and you're consuming this stuff, you don't really have like the educational base or the knowledge base around birth and pregnancy to then reflect and be like, oh, well, actually, you know, the cord wrapped around the neck, like that's not actually like a massive problem, but because it's being sensationalized and preying might be like too harsh of a word, but, you know, preying on the ignorance of the population, really. And the people that put out those videos, they don't care. They probably don't even reflect that what they're putting out there is misinformation or it's going to evoke misinformation. But
oh, totally. And it's like, I think the way that we are so removed from birth as a society and as a culture is not good. Like birth is such a normal, natural thing. Somebody said, I forget who it was, but someone said to me, I can't remember if it's like a famous quote that some wise person said or if it was literally just like a family member that said this, but someone said the only things that are inevitable in life are birth and death. I was like, wow, that's so interesting to think that those are the two things that are inevitable for absolutely every human being, and yet they are the two things that we are like the most removed from. Like 100%. The vast majority of people don't see birth. They aren't around. I mean, you painted that picture before of like siblings being at the birth and like all the aunties and the, you know, like it's this family affair. Whereas now birth and death, they happen in a hospital behind closed doors. It's like, oh, it's private. We don't like, but it's weird. Like it's actually quite bizarre.
Even like death, you know, so whilst I was a student, I worked for 3 years in an aged care home. And I saw death and it just like, I think the two deaths that I was sort of like a part of in a caring like sense, like it was only us, like the workers that were there. You know, there was no family. There was like, imagine you're on your deathbed in an aged care home and that is the end of your life. That's so freaking sad. It's how horrible, you know? But, you know, so, I mean, it goes back just generally to society as a whole that, you know, everything, well, actually, that's not true. Not everything, because there's so many things that are counterproductive to the whole thing. But we want to stay alive for as long as possible. You know, we're always trying to push that boundary. And, you know, I think maybe that's the fear about birth as well, is that it is so sad, and I don't want to come out sounding cruel, but babies are always going to die. There's always going to be death. It's going to be so sad. It's just like, we're never like that. That is just life. That is being human. And it's the same with like older people, like you and I, we're going to die one day. And but it's like in such contrast as well, because like, so I mean, when you go back to birth, and which also doesn't make sense about home birth, it's like it's safer. Like if you don't want to have, negative outcomes, why would you dismiss home birth? Because it's literally safer. Like not for everyone, but say 98% or whatever of people like give birth in a hospital. That doesn't make sense because not 98% of the female population they don't need medical assistance. Like most women's bodies work to birth a baby.
And I feel like there's the fear around what you were touching on before, this idea that birth is something dangerous and scary. But then I think there's also the fear around the experience of birth and how hard it is. And I mean, it goes back a little bit to what we were talking about before about the education. Like, we're not exposed to it, so we don't really understand birth, generally speaking, as a culture. So you don't really know like how much your body really is designed to do it and to cope with it and to manage the intensity that is birth. And like, I am not going to sugarcoat it. Like, it is intense. And you were saying before, like you experienced birth to be a painful thing. So did I. I know there are women out there who say like, do you know what? I actually had a pain-free birth, and I really
it was
didn't
orgasmic.
experience pain.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And it's like, I'm not going to say that's not true. That's amazing. Totally. And it's like, I don't deny that people experience that. Like, I'm not them. I'm not in their body. I don't know what they felt, but all I know is my own lived experience. And I found that it was painful.
Yeah.
And I think, we, especially now in our current day and age where instant gratification is at an all-time high
100%.
and everything is about convenience and comfort. Those two things are like, seriously, I reckon the biggest drivers of people is like, whatever is comfortable and whatever is convenient, that's what we do as human beings now. And we're just walking around like these little zombies looking for the next dopamine hit and the next like comfortable thing. And so we fear the intensity of birth. And I think it's this thing of like, oh, if I can avoid that, then why would I go through it? Like, there's such a belief of, oh, why wouldn't you just get the epidural as soon as you can? Like, why wouldn't you avoid all of that discomfort? And like, people just aren't educated. They don't understand how birth works. They don't understand the ins and outs of your hormones and how much they play a role in helping you to manage birth well. And they don't understand the physiology that goes into it, and just how well made we are as women. Like, we are such well designed machines to like bring life. And so it's weird, and it's unfortunate that there is this fear around birth, and that it is something that's so medicalized. And that statistic that you were talking about of like, oh, it's like 97 or 8% of women that give birth in hospital. I mean, really, probably you should flip that. And it's, I would imagine somewhere along, I don't know, like maybe 98% of women are healthy and have normal pregnancies. It's probably way off, but I'm fully just speculating. It would be the minority of women that actually need medical intervention, that, that need that access to obstetric care in the event of an emergency. And also, I feel like it's important to note when you're speaking about home birth and about things going wrong, because there's also this belief and this fear about transferring. And I think, research has shown that the majority of transfers that happen are non-emergency transfers.
It's like same thing.
Yes, it's like, oh, this is taking a really freaking long time, and actually now I've decided I do want the epidural because I just am tired.
I mean,
that's not an
exhausted.
emergency.
Yeah,
that's not an emergency. That's just a woman going, do you know what? Like, I've changed my mind, and that's okay and fine. But I just think it's important to know that when people do end up transferring to hospital after having started their birth at home, or they had planned to give birth at home, just because there is this percentage of hospital transfers that happen, it's not to say like, see, it's not safe. Those women, like, they weren't okay, they weren't safe, they couldn't do it at home safely. Like, it's not a safety issue the majority of the time. And when it is a safety issue, then it's like, great, that medical intervention is an absolute blessing and it's a gift, and it's good. It's a good thing, but it's certainly overused.
I often think of it in that, if you had a problem with your heart, where would you go? You would probably go to the GP first. You wouldn't go straight to the cardiac the consultant cardiac surgeon in like a major hospital, would you? They'd be like, go away. Like, what are you doing here? But in theory, that heart, something wrong with your heart, whether you've got a racing heart or like palpitations or like whatever, like that could mean that, you're going to have a heart attack, or like something is going to happen, that could seriously happen. But like, I mean, with birth, like, we're already anticipating that anything could go wrong at any time. Somebody could die, the mum could die, the baby could die, everybody could die. So we're going to go straight in, go hard or go home, and it's just that actually increased your risk even more, which is like wild. But we have, such faith in the healthcare system. I mean, lots and lots of midwives choose home birth as well. And you have to kind of think, well, if the midwives were so happy in the hospital system, why aren't they birthing there? Like,
Yeah.
But I mean, these are things that you and I know. I think that the general population doesn't know this, and no
Yeah.
one's telling them this. So they
Yeah.
don't find out. And so they continue on their merry way, and they, trust that the hospital education that is provided is what they need to know. And, like from what I hear, the hospital education is like how to bath your baby, how to change a nappy, and what pain relief options are available. Like,
And policies. Here's
and
our list of
policy.
policies.
Yeah.
Please follow them. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like that's, yeah. And so I think that's why, I personally don't wish to really support women in the hospital system, but women that choose to birth in the hospital system, like 100% need somebody, whether that's a private midwife or a doula or a student midwife. Like anything at that point would be better than nothing, to
Yes.
give that, well, hopefully more of an unbiased view, because the hospital's not going to come out and say, oh yes, Zach, our C-section rate for first-time mums is 50%. Like they're just never going to do that.
Yeah.
Like
And
that's
even
not
like I
good for
saw,
business.
yeah, totally. This little post on my Instagram about activity-based funding and
Mm.
how that all works. And people don't know, like the hospital literally is paid to intervene. And I mean, I guess the point that I was making on my little Instagram thing that I did was, what do you think is going to happen in a 50-50 scenario where it's like, you probably don't really need this episiotomy, but maybe we could do it. I don't know. Let's do it because we're going to get $750 if we do. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, that in itself, I just think it's such an unethical way to structure funding, especially when it comes to maternity services. Like, Mara, I feel
Well, it's
so
in mental
strongly
health as
about that.
well. It's in mental health as
Really?
well. Yeah. And not all public. Well, I don't know about private because I only work in public, but yeah, like you're encouraged. Like as a nurse, I can't diagnose anyone. But on provisional diagnoses and whatever, like you're encouraged to put something because if you put this certain code that only gets you $10, but if you give like a proper diagnosis code, then that gets you like X amount of dollars. And I think people like it's not going to one doctor. Like the doctor themselves isn't getting paid that $750 or whatever for doing that, whatever. But it's how the hospital survives, and the hospital needs to survive. And I mean, hospitals, we do need hospitals. I'm not saying get rid of the hospitals.
No,
but the
definitely
reality
not.
is that we live in capitalism where you need money to make anything and everything work, I mean, the problem is so big, Angie. Even the education, though, like, well, I mean, the antenatal appointments. So I've seen, like, I'm on a bunch of mums groups, and I've seen mums say, "Hey, what do you do when you have an antenatal appointment, but you have other kids? Like, can I bring my kids along for the antenatal appointment, or like even for the birth? Like, hey, what does everybody? I don't have family. I don't really have any close friends to like watch the kids when I go into labor or birth. Like, what should I do? Because you're not allowed to have them. Or like, I don't know, like what each policy or guideline or whatever says, but I can imagine that if you rocked up with your 2-year-old and 3-year-old whilst you're in labor, the hospital would be like, this is not appropriate. We can't support them because, everyone that enters the hospital is now the responsibility of the hospital. And if something happens to that person, that's the hospital. And so it's all about, like being sued and like just crazy. But how sad that, because then you have to essentially pay someone to watch your child because but even like birth education classes and like having or like antenatal appointments, and who can afford for both parents to take 4 hours out of their workday if you're working to go to an antenatal appointment that might actually only be for like 15 minutes. But
And most of them are. Like, it's like, oh, let's check your blood pressure. Let's measure the fundal height. Let's, is the baby moving? Great, tick, next. And it's like, what about the education? What about like, this is an evidence-based approach, and this is what the research says, and blah, 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 empowering women with information. Like, and it's not the midwife's fault. Like, they don't have time. Like, they don't have the time or the space. And I think there's a bit of a misconception too around doulas and like, oh, why do you need a doula if you have a midwife? And I always say to people, like, your midwife doesn't have time, particularly in a hospital setting. It's more prevalent. But like I say, your midwife doesn't have time to be supporting you, coaching you, educating you, giving you the information that is going to result in a better birth experience because they are so busy. They're so burnt out. I don't know about other hospitals, but the hospital that I mostly support women at, kind of the local one closest to where I am, the ratio is maybe, I don't know if it's the same as this now, but it's kind of always been when it's not busy, 1 midwife to 4 laboring women on like a really, really good day. So it's like, if that's madness. Like, that's madness. If that's best case scenario, that there's 1 midwife to 4 laboring women, then the idea that you're going to get tips and techniques and, oh yeah, your back's hurting, maybe the baby's posterior, let's do this, let's do that position. Like, they don't have any time for that. And then like, what do you think's going to happen? Oh, baby's posterior. Oh no, now we haven't had the time and the I guess the resources to invest in trying to help things along in a way that is like non-invasive and that is natural. And so now it's an emergency, and it's like, I mean, maybe posterior is not the best example of that because babies come out posterior all the time. It's no worries. Even in the hospital, I feel like
it attracts further intervention.
I mean, it's unfortunate, and the research has proven time and time again that women who have got access to continuous support in labour do better, and the birth outcomes are far better than
Yeah.
women who don't have that. I mean, it's what you were saying about like midwives who go, oh my gosh, I absolutely don't want to give birth in the hospital system because I work in it and I know it.
Yeah.
Like I actually just got an email from a mum the other week who is a midwife, and she was like, oh, I work at a hospital, and I've seen too much to give birth in hospital. She was like, I've seen too much. I'm giving birth at home, and please, like, I need you to be my doula because I just need to not have what I see. And I just think that in itself speaks so loudly about all of this and just how it works and about how it happens. And and I think the temptation as well to, as a doula who loves physiological birth, and I just have such a passion for it, part of me sometimes thinks like, oh, I just want to do home birth. Like, it would just be so lovely. But I'm like, no, those women need me. Like, because you can't, like, I'm like, oh, they need me.
Yeah. I mean, I guess one of the biggest barriers is that home birth is so freaking expensive, and Medicare's not paying for it. If you go to a hospital, whether, like a public hospital, whether you're having a physiological birth or a C-section, like there's not much difference, like cost wise, like it's the public healthcare system, if you have a private midwife, it just costs so much money. And like so many women like only find home birth after they've already had a negative experience.
Yeah.
But that first time round, like once you're 12 weeks pregnant or whatever, then you've only got, I can't count, 5, 6, 7, you've got however many more weeks left to like find $6,000, $7,000, and who can do that? Like no one. So it's just, I mean, it's there's so many problems, and it's so fantastic that there are so many doulas out there, like that you can, because with midwifery as well, like private home birth midwives, sure, in Melbourne where I am, there's lots of choice. But the further you get out, I imagine in other capital cities, or maybe even not. Like I've recorded some episodes in Darwin recently, and like they're saying that there was like one privately endorsed midwife. But like the further you get out, there's less options.
Yeah, I was literally just speaking to a mum about this today. She was like, she lives 12 hours away from Sydney and pretty rural. Like, she was like, there's only a very, very small handful of private midwives that can do a home birth. And she was like, I just don't connect with any of them. I have serious trauma from a hospital birth experience that I've had. So I'm just going to have a free birth. And it's like, I understand why women do it. I totally get it. And there are even like, it's also important to mention that like sometimes home birth isn't necessarily this like savior. Sometimes people have, so this mum is like, this is her experience. She had a super traumatic hospital birth with her first. Then she was like, no way am I doing that again. I'll have a home birth. This was before they moved out far away. And so she had a second baby at home, but she just felt like the midwife was, I don't know, in her words, she said the midwife like sabotaged my experience. And now she's like, I have even less options where I am now. And I have interviewed a couple of the midwives. I just didn't connect with any of them. So I'm just going to do it on my own because I am too scared to invite someone who I don't fully and completely trust into that sacred and vulnerable experience. And I was like, I'm so sorry that I get it. And I'm so sorry that you're in that situation. And that's so heavy that you feel like you just don't have the option. And so many women feel like they just don't have the option. Like even if they do connect with a local midwife who they, trust and like, but it's too expensive. And they're like, I mean, they're weighing up like birth trauma in a hospital and reliving that and doing that again, or just sending it and doing it by myself in my bathtub, and they choose that. Like that shows how much this impacts women, like how big of a deal it is. And I can't stand when people say like, oh, your birth is one day. Like I'm like, no, it's not. Speak to any woman who has had either an amazing birth or a really bad birth. That bad birth experience sticks with you, and you will think about that pretty much every day for the next few years. It is not one day. And if you have an incredible birth experience and it was this empowering, wonderful thing, you will think about that wonderful birth experience pretty much every day. Like it's not one day. It sticks with you, and it is absolutely worth investing in, whether that is, a midwife that you trust, having a doula that you feel really confident will back you and be in your corner in the hospital setting, whatever it is. Like your birth is worth investing in. And I want to just shout that from the rooftops. Like it's so worth investing in.
But even like, so part of my inspiration for like the doula work that I've started as well is like postpartum, because I found obviously 2020 was a weird time to have a first baby and like your first postpartum and stuff. But I just remember, like sitting on my chair at home and, it's lockdown or there's a radius or whatever the heck was happening. And so the midwives, because they were also, attending other births and whatever, they were scared to spend too much time or I don't know if scared's the right word, but they were worried about spending too much time in families' homes in case they caught COVID and like spread it. So like the postpartum visits, postnatal visits, whatever, was so minimal. And I remember sitting on my chair, like being like, well, I don't have really like any friends that have had babies or breastfeed. I don't really have anyone except my midwife, and like my midwife can't just like come on over at like 6 p.m. when my nipples are so sore and I can't figure out, and my baby's not turning his head one way, and I'm like, I don't actually know like what is happening. Like I knew this would be hard, but like I also thought that maybe I would have some guidance. And like second time around, I was like obviously a lot more confident. But you know, private midwives, I suppose, can, you know, decide for themselves or their own business, like where to draw the line for care. But like part of my hope is that I can provide a longer duration of support, especially for mums that are unsure or do encounter like further challenges that aren't, you know, before that 6 weeks. Because for so many things, like that first 6 weeks, you're just kind of like in a bubble. Like, you know, you're so, well, at least for me, so happy and you know, everything's new and exciting. But like once like the sleep deprivation kicks in and like things can get really hard, like if you still don't have your community at 6 weeks, like you're still not going to have your community after either. And like in terms of breastfeeding support, you know, I went after work the other day to give some pointers and hang out with a mum that had just had a baby. And I was thinking on my drive home, because, you know, I spent like an hour and a half or whatever there. I was thinking, you know, a private midwife is so busy. Like they you know, they provide so much more individualized care than you would get in the hospital system, absolutely, but they still are restricted. Like there's still things that they can't do. Like most aren't gonna be able to rock up at 6 p.m. to like, you know, give you some tips or breastfeeding. You know, it's pretty much business hours unless you're in labor, and then there's obviously, you know, they're meant to be there. But I hope that I can, but I know that other doulas, and like that's one of the big benefits of doula work, is that there is that flexibility. You can work it in around your life, but like also the women that you're supporting's life, and like what their needs are. You like kind of the sky's the limit in terms of like what supports, you know, you have in your sort of doula toolbox as well. Like, yeah, I mean, there's very experienced doulas out there that have lots of amazing things that they've learned, and yeah, that's what I hope to also be able to offer and continue to give to the women of Melbourne.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Yeah, it's really special after having experienced like the birth with them, you know, and then coming into that postpartum time and getting to go over to their house and just not be in a rush. And it's like, you have me here for hours. I am here to help you. Like, I will do laundry, I'll do dishes, I'll cook for you, I'll feed you. Like, you know, you're feeding the baby, someone needs to feed you, someone needs to feed the mum. And it's so nice to be able to do that for the mum. Like, you know, be that extra pair of hands and help with whatever it might be, whether it's housework or errands, or like, it's such a different level of support and such a different level of help that I just wish every single woman like knew about. Because I mean, yeah, doulas are not a very well known thing. Like a lot of people don't know about doulas and what we do, and I guess the value that we can provide to women and to families, you know, as a whole. Yeah, it's such a joy and such an honor to get to support women the way that we do. And I mean, it never gets old. It never ever gets old. Whenever I walk into a house, you know, where this family's just had a baby, and it's like you just can see the bags under their eyes and they're tired, and it's like, you know, and it's a mess. And I always tell my families, like, do not tidy up. Like, don't you dare. If I walk in and there are like dishes are clean and the laundry's folded, like, I'm gonna be offended. Like, I'm like, you better not clean up. I want to walk in and see a sink full of dishes, and I want to see laundry everywhere and such a disaster, because it means that you're soaking in this time and you are, you know, prioritizing rest and bonding and all the things, and that's what you should be focusing on. And like we were talking about before, the rest is up to the village, and it's so special and wonderful to be able to be that village for people. And I just wish that absolutely everyone had a doula.
Yeah, I wish that too. Yeah, and there's so many amazing things that, like, you know, social media, for all its problems, like, it also brings us closer to, you know, cultures and communities that are still connected with birth and with those traditional practices, like yoni steaming and stuff. Like, what the heck? I never heard about that before, like 12 months ago. That, like, belly binding, like things that are meant to like nourish and nurture you as a woman that has just given birth to literal life, and we freaking deserve it. Like, there is no humanity without us. Like, we carry, you know. I shared something on my Instagram the other day that, you know, in Maori culture or language, like the word for or what there's a word, anyway, it's on my Instagram, and it's like the womb is the house of humanity or something. And I was just like, oh my gosh, that's so true. That's so true. Like,
that's so beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But yeah, I could talk for hours about birth.
Oh my gosh, I feel like I could seriously go all night.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try and wrap this up somehow. What would your parting wisdom be as a mama who has done it and given birth? You've done all those hours supporting women, you know, who are giving birth and doing it. Yeah, what's your advice?
I think my advice would be to try and be open-minded. Like, home birth might not be for you. All of these things that we've talked about might not be for you, but just be open-minded enough to just listen to someone's experience, listen to a home birth story, listen to a free birth story, like a positive one, not one that like Channel 10 is like putting on their bloody reels or something, you know, like
Yeah.
be open to learning and and questioning or being curious, you know, when somebody says, oh, like this is what we do, asking why. And if they can't tell you why, then that's a red flag.
Yeah, huge.
And be careful, because I am a healthcare professional and I really understand how the system works. Whilst I don't work in maternity, the system maybe once upon a time, like in healthcare, like it used to be broadly individualized, but the system is so big now. There's too many people and like relying on these systems, and they're so big. Like you should see the matrix or the hierarchies of like who's involved in these complicated businesses that are called hospitals.
Yeah.
And like at the end of the day, you know, like I mean, in specifically reference to hospitals, like you're pretty much just a patient ID, like you're a UR number, you know. And so yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's like one piece of advice, but but just be careful,
no,
be
it's
curious,
good. It's good.
ask questions, be open, and think about, I mean, this is something that people always say, I feel, in our world at least, is that think about what's going to happen when the baby's here, and maybe plan for something, plan as if something had happened. Because if you end up having like, I mean, even with Murphy, like I had a birth at home, but I could not go to the toilet by myself for like a week. My husband was having to help me for a week go to the toilet. Did I anticipate that? No. But did it really impact like my mobility? Yes.
Yeah.
And yes, I guess that's where, you know, having support postpartum, even if it's just a postpartum doula, someone to like bring a meal, like it's not luxurious. You freaking deserve it.
Yeah. And need, like deserve
yeah.
and need.
Yeah. Through like fluid loss, blood loss, like the baby that's been just sapping everything from you, like you need nourishment. You must go on. Your body must go on. Your body is still like, you know, like if you're breastfeeding, like it's still got to like, it's got to kick in action to another job. Like you need that. You need that love.
Yeah. I love that advice. I totally agree with everything you said. So good. So important.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a rating or a comment, and I can't wait to see you back here for the next one.